Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over your total snowfall forecast for 2021 into 2022. We're going to be talking about how much snowfall you average based on data from the past 30 years, and then we're going to be looking at whether I think you'll see more or less snowfall compared to normal. Now, if you want a forecast for any of my previous videos this week that I've done, my August forecast, my fall foliage forecast, my winter forecast, or any of the upcoming ones, just leave a comment down below. And if you want a personal forecast for your area on this video, also leave a comment down below. I usually respond within a couple or a few hours of you posting them, and I respond to all of the comments. So if you have any questions or you just want a personal forecast, leave a comment down below. Let's start off with the areas further south. These are areas that typically don't see snowfall throughout the winter. These are the areas that are close to the Gulf Coast or into the southwest in those lower lying areas, fairly warm throughout most of the winter. They do get some snowfall at times. You remember last year we saw that snow down in Texas and even into areas like Houston, which typically would not see snowfall in an average year. So it can definitely happen. We've had events, many events. It usually happens once every couple of years, depending on where exactly you are. But for the most part, in an average year, these areas would be seeing less than 1/10 of an inch of snowfall. So most of these areas are not really concerned about snowfall in the average winter year. Taking a look at the next shade, this is kind of a turquoise color. This is where we're looking at less than 3 inches on average for this entire region. So that covers parts of the southwest, also in through parts of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, a little bit of the panhandle of Florida, and then back through Georgia and South Carolina. For the majority of these areas, we're only looking at 1, maybe 2 inches of snowfall on average per year. So that typically means that you're going to get one quick storm, and then that's pretty much your winter's worth of snowfall. Of course, we do have some winters just a couple years back where we had a couple of storms that rolled through here in one winter, so that is possible. And again, these are just averages, so we've had definitely some winters where some of these spots get 10 inches of snowfall, and I believe that actually happened last year or the year before, I can't remember, but we had a big storm right in this area, and that can happen. That can push your totals way up. So this is basically just taking an average. If one year you got 0 inches of snowfall and the next year you got 6 inches of snowfall, you're going to average out to 3 inches, even though you had a very different amounts of snowfall per year. So this is just an average. And by the way, I'm using data from 1981 to 2010. We don't have the map out from the 1991 to 2020 data just yet. So this is all data that's 10 years old, but none of the averages really changed quite too much. So I'm going to keep up with the map, but of course these aren't completely up to date just because NOAA hasn't released the newest map for the snowfall averages. 3 to 6 inches in parts of the Pacific Northwest, and then a thin stripe which goes from parts of southern Arizona and southern New Mexico through parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, into parts of the lower Tennessee Valley, gets cut off there, and then it moves back into parts of the Carolinas. So this is where, again, you're starting to get a little bit more snowfall. These are the areas that would typically see a decent storm per year, maybe 1 or 2 per year, and these are areas where it's not too uncommon, it's not too crazy if they do get some snowfall. It is actually quite common that you'll see 1 or 2 storms move into these areas per year. So these are the areas that are a little bit more accustomed to getting a decent snowfall. Most of these areas are averaging 3, 4, 5 inches over the entire year. So typically most of that snow is going to come either in January or February. The rest of the winter, we're not really talking about too much snowfall for most of these areas. 6 to 12 inches, these are the areas that start to get a little bit more noticeable. These are the areas that you can get 2, 3, maybe even 4 storms depending on where you are per year, and these are where we're starting to deal with more areas that can get snowfall maybe in December. They can even get it sometimes later into March. So these are the areas that are getting a little bit colder and you're getting a little bit more snowfall compared to the areas further south. This goes through parts of the southwest, in through the Central Plains, down into the Tennessee Valley, cuts parts of Tennessee right in half, and then moves just south of the Appalachias into parts of North Carolina. So that's your 6 to 12 inch area. That's where we're looking at half a foot to a foot of snowfall per year. So a decent amount of total snowfall on average. 1 to 2 feet of snowfall if you live within this light blue area, which goes through the Intermountain West in the lower lying areas. So parts of the areas around Boise, Idaho, some of the lower lying areas into eastern Oregon, where we don't have a ton of elevation difference. Also into parts of Nevada in the lower lying areas, away from that northeastern part of the state. Parts of southern Utah, where it's a little bit lower lying. So these areas where you're not into the high elevation is where you can get 1 to 2 feet on average per year. A lot of that in the West is due to not having a lot of precipitation in general, so it's hard to get any amount of rain or snow throughout the winter. But further to the east into the Central Plains, the Tennessee Valley, the Lower Ohio Valley, or the Mid-Atlantic, that's mainly due to temperature. It's usually a little bit too warm to get snowfall in these areas. These are the areas that typically are most prone to ice storms. The area between the 6 to 12 inches and 1 to 2 feet. This is the area that typically is going to see the majority of your ice or mixed precipitation storms, because usually it's not cold enough to see the full event be all snowfall. So sometimes you'll see a storm go from rain to snow, or maybe snow back to rain. So these are the kind of areas right in between, but in between the usually cold areas and the usually fairly mild areas that can get in between some of those ice and mixed precipitation type of storms. 2 to 3 feet of average snowfall. You can see that covers some parts of the West, and then also a stripe through the central and northern plains into the lower Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, down through the spine of the Appalachians, and then also for a thin area in parts of the coastal Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. This is where we're starting to get a decent amount of snowfall, and usually most of these areas are getting 5-6 different snowstorms per year. Most of them are lighter, but of course some of these areas can get, just 1 or 2 big storms that just pushes them over the edge with the snowfall. So these areas are a little bit more accustomed to more of the snowfall, and usually we are seeing a few storms at least per year within these zones. 3 to 4 feet. These are areas that are typically fairly cold throughout the year. They're usually cold enough to see mostly snowstorms, where you're not dealing with too much in the way of ice mixing over or freezing precipitation. Although it does happen over some of these areas, but most of these areas are cold enough that they're able to get mostly snowy storms, where you're not dealing with too much of a mix of precipitation, and because of that, it can push them a little bit higher in terms of the snow totals. 3 to 4 feet, that covers much of the West, the northern plains, into parts of the lower Great Lakes, and also through parts of the Appalachians, and a thin stripe through parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts. So a thin area there where you see 3 to 4 feet of snowfall. 4 to 6 feet on average of snowfall per year. You can see this covers more of the Great Lakes area, where you're dealing with more of the lake effect in those areas. We're looking at generally 4 to 6 feet through parts of the upper and western lakes. We also see that for parts of the interior Northeast, and also into central and northern New England, as well as a good majority of the higher elevation regions within the West. If we move on here to the 6 to 8 feet area, you can see that covers much of the Rockies. Now you're starting to deal with even some of the areas higher up in elevation in the mountains, dealing with 6 to 8 feet of average snowfall. You can also see that for some parts of the Great Lakes, in western Michigan, parts of Wisconsin, the UP, also into easternmost Minnesota. And then you see that also for a few pockets in parts of Pennsylvania, even a little bit of Ohio, through upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, as well as the Smoky Mountains in northeastern West Virginia. 8 to 12.5 feet, and these are mainly areas that are either driven by elevation or lake effect. And even lake effect doesn't necessarily have to be just those typical lake effect events that you think about, where it's just a normal day and then all of a sudden you get a big lake effect band to just move over your house. Some of the lake effect is actually coming from storms, so you're dealing with storms moving into these areas, already dropping multiple inches of snowfall, and then that's being enhanced by lake effect, which is driving into the storm as well. So these areas are getting lake effect even when you don't really notice it on radar. So they're getting lake effect enhancement with some of these snowstorms, and that's what really helps them get a ton of snowfall. 8 to 12.5 feet of average snowfall per year If you live up in northern Michigan, even a little bit of Wisconsin, through parts of northwestern Pennsylvania, western New York, northern Vermont, and also a little bit of northern New Hampshire and northwestern Maine, as well as some of the fairly high elevation regions in parts of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Washington, Oregon, and California. Looking at the final area, this is the areas that average over 150 inches of snowfall per year. You can see that for some parts of the lower Adirondacks, the southern Adirondacks, also for a little area in the northern UP of Michigan, they usually get a ton of snowfall because of lake effect. They're just kind of a little island or kind of a peninsula in the UP of Michigan, and that can help the lake effect just kind of drive over them. So they get a ton of snow per year. And then also in parts of the Rockies and parts of Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, through the Pacific Northwest, and also back through Colorado and Utah. So these are areas that get a ton of snowfall per year. Now let's talk about whether I think you're going to see more or less snowfall compared to normal based on what I put in my winter forecast, which by the way came out yesterday if you want to go check that out. And again, I'm also doing personal forecasts if you leave a comment down below on that video as well. Slightly below normal, I think in the southwest. One of the reasons that I pointed out in that video was because we're going into an end zone neutral or very weak La Nina pattern, and typically that means that you're not going to be dealing with a lot of rainfall in the southwest. Usually most of that rain is going to be centered towards the northwest, and they usually get most of that rainfall, so there's not a lot going on in the southwest. Just because there isn't a lot of precipitation, you can't get really any snowfall if there's no rainfall or precipitation at all. So I think it will be below normal, although I think it will be not too drastic. I still think you'll get a decent amount of rainfall and snowfall probably in the earlier months of the winter, and then also probably back through March and April. I think it'll also pick up right around there. Looking at the slightly above average area, you can see that's for the northwest, and then another area in parts of the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, the Tennessee Valley, and also through the northeast and mid-Atlantic. This is where I'm expecting more snowfall compared to normal. So I would say probably 25%, 125% of your normal. So let's say you average 20 inches of snowfall, then you're probably going to get 25 inches or around there for the entire year. I can't give exact amounts just because that's going to be highly variable on exactly where you live, whether you're higher up in elevation, whether you're closer to one of the Great Lakes, or also where each individual storm goes. So I can't give exact amounts, but I can say roughly, 125% of your normal, 150% of your normal. So I'm expecting it to be fairly above normal over these spots. The northwest, I have that area highlighted because they are expecting more precipitation than normal. That just gives you a better chance of seeing one or two of those storms, especially in the Pacific Northwest along the I-5 corridor. Some of those areas could definitely see some of the snowfall over their average snowfall, which is actually not that high. It's only about 3 to 6 inches over much of that area. So if you got one or two storms, that should push you over the edge in terms of the amount of total snowfall. And then I have another area of moderately above average in parts of the Ohio Valley, the lower Great Lakes, and also into the interior northeast. I left out parts of the southeast, the southern plains, and also the northern plains for a couple of reasons. I left out the southeast and the southern plains because I didn't want to mark them up because of what happened just last year where we saw that big storm. I would never be able to forecast that 3-4 months out in advance. So of course I'm just going to leave the possibility that these areas, since they don't average a ton of snowfall in general, especially in areas like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, they don't average a ton of snowfall. So if you get one storm that rolls through down through there, they're going to be way above average. So I'm not going to put anything up there, although I will mention that there is definitely the possibility that we see some amount of snowfall, probably not as intense as what happened last year in Texas and some of the surrounding areas, but I still do think there will probably be at least one or two storms somewhere within this general region. In the northern plains, I'm a little bit stuck on whether I think it'll be above or below normal, just because these areas typically get most of their snowfall. Their snowiest month is actually in March and April. This forecast only goes from December through February. This is from my winter forecast. So I think if you were to look at the entire winter, if you were to say maybe from September all the way to April and May, then I think these areas would be near normal or a little bit above normal, just because I think they're going to have an active March. But I think for the majority of the winter months, December through February, I think it'll be fairly dry, and that's how it normally is. They usually see a lot of snowfall into parts of October, November, and then also into some parts of early December, and then on the back end for parts of March and April. So I'm a little bit stuck there on whether I think there will be more snowfall or less snowfall. Right now, I'm just going to leave them in that neutral zone. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Just an update. We already have your August fall foliage, winter, and also a couple more forecasts which are going to be coming out over the next couple of days. So again, your August forecast, your fall foliage forecast, and your winter forecast are already out, as well as the total snowfall forecast, which is this video right now. And then tomorrow, the 14th, we're going to be issuing the first snowfall forecast, and then the first frost forecast will be coming out the day after. Then we'll go back to regular uploads where I'm going over the daily weather events. So if you did enjoy this, please consider leaving a like and turning on your notifications as you and also subscribing. If you have any questions, then leave a comment on any of my videos, even if it's not one of the longer range videos. I respond to all my comments regardless of which video they're on. So just leave a comment if you want to, if you have any questions, or if you want a personal forecast. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.